here to talk about situational awareness. And I contend in the fire service that while we'll deal with the same problem over and over and over on our job, that we don't always have a grasp of what the true situation is. And that inability to understand what the situation or the problem is oftentimes leads the fire officer to make inappropriate or uneducated decisions. So I'm going to start this conversation off with, what's your problem? A statement that most likely in the real world would entice a fight. But in this situation, in this course, I want you to pay attention to and always ask yourself that question, what's your problem? So I just ask you, what's your problem? There's a couple other questions that you have to answer as well. Do you really know what your problem is? Are you sure of your answer? Do you have a problem? Or you're just creating a problem? And let's look at each one of those individually. Do you really know what your problem is? You've been dispatched to a call, an incident or whatever, and the only thing you know about that problem is what you've been told over the radio. How often in your job have you taken that as face value and then proceeded to apply a solution to that, and it's based on hearsay? It's based on what somebody told a dispatcher over the phone about what they perceived the issue was. Are you sure of your answer? So when you look and figure out, when you get there, do your 360 and you do all those things to try to identify what's going on here, are you sure what you see is what you really have? How many times have you been to a situation where you've looked at it at face value and then realized, geez, there's something going on over here I didn't see earlier? So you really have to answer the question, are you really sure of what your answer is to the question? Do you even have a problem? Somebody else's need does not necessarily constitute an emergency on your part or a problem in your lap. And going hand in hand with that, are you creating more of a problem by really not understanding the entire situation? So I still contend that if the fire officer, the lieutenant, the battalion chief, the police officer doesn't answer all of those questions, and I give you the fact that it's going to take a very quick response to each one of those as you go through and answer those questions. But you have to answer those questions, because I'll go back to the thing I said earlier. If you don't know what the problem is, how are you going to fix it? So let me give you an example. As a young fire officer, I was a chief in a city, and we had a 4-alarm fire in the middle of the night in a big warehouse. And things were going swimmingly well. I had a fire in a large warehouse. I had done my 360. I had placement of apparatus throughout the whole structure. I saw what I saw and believed that this is all it was. Well into the fire, a young firefighter come up to me and says, "Chief, I see something that looks odd." I says, "What is it?" He says, "I don't know. Will you take a look?" And so he shows me, walks me over to this area, and there's a milk jug with gasoline in it and an alarm clock tied to it. As it turned out, there were 6 of these throughout the fire. Someone had set this building on fire. Now I saw that jug. As I look back later, from my vantage point, I saw that white thing. I didn't know what that white thing was. And it had taken a little more time to really investigate something I didn't understand in my picture. I probably would have had a different response to this, because now I have not only a crime scene, but a much more dangerous scenario for the firefighters I was placed in to fight the fire. So if I ask myself that question, that same question, what is my problem? I misdiagnosed it. I didn't do a good enough job identifying the hazard, the problem. Had I have done that, I would have done things entirely different. And the last comment I made is, are you creating a problem? By not knowing what the situation is in its entirety, are we making assumptions that are going to place people in harm's way, that we don't understand why and what's going on, and are we creating more? Maybe it is something as simple as just a little fire. Are we making something more out of it than it is? Maybe it's something a lot bigger than we take for granted, and we don't deal with it accordingly. So again, you have to ask yourself the question, are you creating a problem? Several years ago, I was on duty responding to one of our stations to take care of some work, and I came across a motel. And it was a 2-story motel in an older part of town. It had been around, probably since the 70s. And I noticed as I drove by out of the corner of my eye, there was black smoke coming from the structure. this seemed odd to me. And so I stopped, and I identified the fact that there was a fire. I didn't have time. I called it in. I was on the wrong radio channel because I wasn't prepared to call in my problem. And I think a lot of times as fire officers, we're really good at having somebody else say, you have a problem, go fix it. Here's a situation where I found the problem. I had to identify what that is and then deal with it accordingly. So after I got the response there and people were coming to the fire, it appeared that the fire had been in the attic. And it boiled out of the one apartment and it curled up under the eaves and was burning horizontally under the eaves. And there was smoke coming from the attic area. I was comfortable that I didn't have an attic fire. I was pretty sure that it was contained to the room, and the crews went into the room, they knocked the fire out, but I had secondary fire in the attic, or it appeared to be in the attic. And I had fire officers on the back side of the building says, you have an attic fire. Now I could have listened to what they were saying, but at face value, what I was seeing in front of me didn't support their conclusion. Had I have created my own problem by saying, okay, I have this, I opened up the roof and now drew the fire into the attic, I would have lost the top of the building. But I stopped, took a look at what I perceived as the problem, that input from other officers, and without creating another problem, all I did was, let's do this, and applied a tactic that worked in the situation. So be careful that somebody else doesn't cause yourself a problem or create a problem that you don't have. This presentation is full of questions, and those questions are valid questions for the officer to answer, the fire officer to answer. And one of them is, how can you apply the right solution to a problem you don't understand? I'm sure everybody out there has been in that situation where you've looked at something, you've said, this is what I have. I've had this same problem dozens of times, and you applied a solution, but it wasn't the right solution. Because you didn't have it wasn't the problem you had. So I want you to ask yourself, how can you apply the right solution to a problem you don't understand? So what I'm going to do now is I want to give you some ideas. Some ideas that help you understand why you make the decisions you make and how you better can understand the situation in order to make the right decisions. The first one I want to talk about is recognition prime decision making. This was an idea that came out of the military many years ago. The military was looking for a way for them to identify how their field leaders would make decisions at a snap, a quick decision, because something bad is happening right now, I got to do something. The problem the military had, they didn't have any point of reference at that particular time when they were doing this study. So they looked to the fire service. And they went to the fire service and said, you guys make decisions all the time, snap decisions. Something happens, you react. How do you do that? And they came up with recognition prime decision making. And basically, if you look at your head, inside your head is a big slide carousel, if you're pre-1980. If you're post-1980, it could be a thumb drive, a zip drive, or any media storage of your device. But somewhere in your head, there's a file containing a whole bunch of pictures of something you've seen or done before. So what they found was that these officers, these seasoned fire officers, where they'd flash a picture up, here's your problem, and in their head, the slide carousel would wheel around, and it'd pull up a slide that says, I've seen that before, and what I've seen before, I did this, and handled the problem. You probably already know that this is the work of Dr. Klein. I would recommend you take the time to look up some of his resources. And one of them is Sources of Power, How People Make Decisions. Will better help you understand how he came up with recognition prime decision making and how it applies to you as the fire officer. I can't do that justice in this short period of time. So there's 3 variations of recognition prime decision making. The first one is, if this, then I do this. And that's the most common one. If you're an experienced fire officer, you have a whole bunch of ifs in your slide carousel. And you see the problem, and you react to the situation, and then you do this. That's the first variation, and the most common of the variations. So the second variation is, I don't know what the if is. I don't really understand my problem, but I have a whole bunch of solutions over here that I can apply to the then. What happens is, as I'm looking for the solution, I'm trying to apply a solution to a problem I don't understand. And so I'm looking for details, clues, the slide carousel spin around. I'm looking for something here that makes sense so I can apply this solution. I've never seen this before, but I have a lot of training in how to deal with a whole bunch of things. The third variation is just the opposite of the second. I know what my problem is, but I don't know what my solution is. And that's a very real situation in today's world. If you look at the problems fire officers, police officers, EMS workers are facing, whether it's active shooters or whatever, we're dealing with terrorist events that we've never dealt with before. Understand this is a terrorist event. I understand this is my problem. But I've never been in a situation like this before. I recognize this through training, but I don't have legitimate solutions to deal with this. So the fire officers at that point has to come up with solutions and build those solutions on the fly. So there's a couple of differences between recognition, prime decision-making, and sequential decision-making. Sequential decision-making is you're putting all the pieces together to come up with what the solution is and then applying a problem or applying a solution. Versus recognition is that knee-jerk, I see this now, I have to fix it response. It's a recognition and then a decision to apply a solution. What you're really doing with recognition, prime decision-making, or RPD, is recognizing a pattern instead of going through a process. And one of the things we face with that is if we go through that pattern, we recognize that pattern, and we apply something, we may miss something. But we don't necessarily always have the time over here to go through the sequential decision-making process. So there's got to be a balance in between the two to allow the fire officer to make a decision that's accurate and apply the right solution. So let's give an example of the first variation. If this, then do this. I go to a car fire, a run-of-the-mill car fire. I see the flames, it's under the hood. What do? Cruise, pop the hood, put water on the fire. Pretty simple. And I'm able to do that because I've seen this one a million times before. I recognize the problem, and this is the solution that always works. And this is what I applied to it. We do this over and over and over again with so many different types of events. So let's talk about variation number 2. And that is, I really don't understand my situation, my problem, because I've never seen one before. And take a young fire officer who's new on the job, and we have a hazmat event. There's a railroad derailment, and there's hazardous materials involved. I know how to deal with hazardous materials specifically to the individual ones that I can identify. But I've never seen them all piled on top of each other. I've never seen them burning or leaking or whatever. But I have to apply all of these solutions to this problem that I'm not 100% sure I have a full grasp on because I've never seen it before. And number 3 is we get a lot of slides in our carousel from the news. I have never seen a terrorist attack. I have never been to an active shooter. But through my training, I have a whole bunch of things that I think I should be doing in this, but I've never applied those into the real world setting. So I recognize the problem. I'm just not sure that I have in my toolbox the tool to fix the problem. We in the fire service have been taught recognition, prime decision making for years. If this is what we have, this is what we do. It's the common theme day in, day out through emergency services in this country. But there are some problems to this, and there's some pros to this as well. One of the benefits of recognition prime decision making is it functions well in conditions where time is limited, and in which the information is limited and the goals are poorly defined. Where I gotta do something now and I don't have time to think about it. That's where it came from in the first place. How did we make these decisions that were critical to life safety or to a problem without the time needed to really look at sequentially? The second benefit of recognition prime decision making is it works well for seasoned fire officers, firefighters, people who've done this for a while. Their slide carousel is full. They have so many examples to choose from. They have so many partial examples to choose from, they can put those partial ones together to make a complete one. I remember a time when I was a brand new firefighter, my first commercial structure fire. I remember it happened yesterday. I had gone through the academy, I had done training, I knew exactly what to do. But I never saw this problem before. And it was a restaurant that was fully involved in fire, and we were making an entry because we weren't sure somebody was inside. And we went in there, and I will tell you that I had never been in this situation before. I knew that I had the hose, I knew I was going to squirt water, but I wasn't sure what I was looking for or looking at. And I wasn't prepared to deal with anything that would pop up. Same thing happens to fire officers. A brand new lieutenant just got promoted last week. He's in the engine, he's going to a fire, and this is his first one. His nerves are a little high, and here flashes a picture. Ooh, I hadn't seen that one before. He draws on his slides from a firefighter and an engineer. They don't work. He has to come up with a solution to a problem he's never seen before. Seasoned fire officers don't face this issue. They're able to just pick it up and run. So clearly the benefit of RPD is having those people understand what the situation is. By having them have the slides in their carousel, to giving them the tools to recognize the problem. What we in the fire service have to do is add those slides. Get those people that experience, that training knowledge, something that they can draw from to recognize a problem in order to fix it. So we talked about some of the pros, some of the benefits of RPD. Let's look at the next slide. It's blank. There's nothing on this slide. Don't adjust your computer. It's by design. Because it illustrates exactly what we've been talking about. Is the limitation to RPD is I got no slide. I don't know what this is. I can't identify the problem because I've never seen it before. Just like this. You don't know what I'm talking about because you don't see it on the piece of paper. The slide's blank. Now, how do we fix that? That's where it's really important to delve into. Because we're seeing less and less calls. We're busy, but the high-end, big-ticket, high-risk types of calls are declining. That's a good thing. But for the fire officer, the firefighter, the emergency worker, what's happening is our slide carousel is becoming empty and less useful for us. So how do we make up for that? And the word is training. Training, training, training. If you can't define your slide from a real-world experience, then your training divisions within your organizations need to be creating scenario-based training, realistic training. We no longer can say here's a picture of a house, or let's simulate pulling this hose or whatever. We have to actually get out and do it. We want to make sure that that firefighter, lieutenant, chief can take something away from that training and add to their slide carousel. One of the things we can do is look into simulators. The cost of simulators are coming down. Our ability to put real-world pictures in front of our firefighters so they can glean from these images things they need to do. What we're doing in our organization, I'm sure you all are doing in your organization, is I have firefighters coming to me on a daily basis. Hey, Chief, look at this video I found on the computer of this building burning. I've never seen that before. And even some of those, they're starting to recognize the fact that, hey, this is going to collapse. And as they watch farther, sure it does. So they're able to look at these real-world fires that somebody else experienced and apply tactics to it. That's become huge for us. It's probably one of the best and easiest access training available to firefighters. So YouTube is not a function of just cat videos anymore. It's actually a benefit to the professional firefighter to get information and see things they need to see through the eyes of somebody else. So if you look at historically how we've done this in the fire service, we've used those old guys, the guys that came up long before us to teach us what they learned and what they saw years before we started. It's institutional knowledge. They've been around the horn a little bit. They understand what's going on. But there's a couple of drawbacks to that. One is if they leave, and they're going to leave, everybody's going to retire, then we've lost that institutional knowledge. The other downside to institutional knowledge is that we can't use slides from 1970 in 2015. We have to continue to add slides. And quite often in the fire service, people stop adding slides. I've got enough slides in my carousel, it's full. I'm good to go. But what's happening is the problems we're facing are changing. and the slide carousel isn't. That's one of the problems with not growing with the fire service and what's happening today. Ongoing training of what you're seeing today will benefit you. By all means. The people who've come up before you have a lot of scars and a lot of memories and a lot of things they can teach you. Learn from them. Glean that information while it's still available, but put it in perspective. It's going to be great information to have if the 50-year-old building downtown burns. They've given you ideas how to deal with that. But keep in mind, put it in perspective, because as they leave, they're not going to be seeing what you're going to be seeing in the future. So continually add slides to your carousel. In addition to what I just talked about with the institutional knowledge and not staying up on training and helping you overcome these limitations, there's some other limitations that we need to talk about. And those are limitations placed on you by your body. Human nature. So let's talk about the brain. Let's talk about the amygdala. It's kind of a pretty useful thing if you think about it. If you're getting chased by the bear, you want this thing working 100%. Because it's gonna kick in the fight or flight, and it's gonna get you out of harm's way. The problem with it, though, is sometimes it kicks in at the least appropriate time. When people are running from the building, it's good for them. But when we're running towards that building and we're fighting the amygdala response, that physiological and physical response is given us, it's not good for us. Because what it does is we're gonna start getting narrowing focus. We're not gonna see the big picture. And as more we narrow, the less we see about the problem. So what is the amygdala? It's a small walnut or almond-sized organ in the base of the brain. That when you see something that's triggering your physiological, psychological, or environmental stressors, it's going to squeeze out dopamine, and that's going to kick in the fight or flight scenario for you. It's going to notify the cerebellum. The cerebellum is going to say, hey, I got a slide here that says, well, I'm supposed to do something, and it's going to look for that. And if you can't find that slide in your head, it's going to tell you to run. It's going to tell you to get out of harm's way. I challenge you that you need to understand how this works. Because like I said before, those people leaving the building, it's working good for them. But you're the seasoned fire officer, and I challenge each of you out there that no matter how long you've done this job, there's something out there that's going to cause you stress. You're going to scratch your head and say, I don't feel comfortable with this. And when you say, I don't feel comfortable about something, the amygdala kicks in. This isn't right. You're going to have that fight or flight. And as that happens, you're going to start narrowing your senses, and you're going to start bringing it all together and not seeing what's going on in front of you. So the amygdala is stimulated by stress. 3 different types of stresses. The first one is psychological. Someone puts a gun at your face. I'm guessing that doesn't happen on a regular basis. That's going to cause a huge stress. Your amygdala is going to kick in. The next one is physiological. I'm out of shape. I just got done taking a hydrant, and I'm running 2 blocks back to the engine, and then I'm placed in a situation where I have to go fight fire, or I have to do something. My body's not ready for that. I'm stressed out. The amygdala kicks in. And then the last one is environmental. It's hot. You're wearing 60 pounds worth of stuff, and it's 100 degrees outside. It causes a stress on your body. It's going to cause a stress within your amygdala, and it's going to kick in, and your body's going to respond. It's taking it away from other senses. As things start shutting down, things aren't working right. So don't forget the 3 things that are going to cause you problems. Psychological, I've never seen this before, I'm scared. Physiological, I'm not in the best shape. And environmental, it's hot in here, it's cold out here. The elements are contributing to the problem, regardless of the stressors of the 3 I just mentioned. When that happens, the amygdala releases dopamine, notifies the cerebellum, and the cerebellum desperately looks for a solution to the problem. Looks for that slide to answer the questions you have. So now that we know what happens, how do we overcome these stressors? First of all, we mentioned it earlier, I'm going to mention it again because it's so vitally important. Training, scenario-based training. We recently in our organization, in our training division, had a pretty simple drill. But what we did was we put our firefighters in various situations under a high level of stress. They had to climb up 100 feet under the building and then come down the stairs. They were wearing full SCBAs. It wasn't real strenuous, but it was strenuous enough that when they walked into the room and the light flipped on for 3 seconds and they were faced with a whole bunch of things that they had to differentiate from and then leave, it caused them stress. Some of those pictures in that room would have harmed them if they were real. What we found was when they left the building, they're saying, I didn't see this. I didn't recognize this. We put them through later and they started picking up more. They recognized that the stressors and how to overcome those stressors, and we added the slides to their carousel. Scenario-based training. I can't mention that enough. It's vitally important to our firefighters that we teach them early on that how the amygdala works, why it does what it does, and if they understand that and we add that to our training matrix, they'll better understand how to overcome those stresses. So let me summarize the training concept. Historically, we've gotten off of our engines at a drill ground, we've pulled fire hose, and we're under no stress. We're just doing repetitions. We've taken this hydrant hundreds and hundreds of times under no stress. With scenario-based training, we may still do that task, but we're going to add some stress to it, or we're going to place them into a situation where there's a higher level of stress. So what ultimately is going to happen is they learn to control that stress response while still adding a slide to their carousel. The second thing to overcome is health. There's workout rooms in the fire service for a reason. Historically, that's never been the case. I remember when I started in the fire service 35 years ago, working out wasn't on the top of the things to do list. You got your workout through going to calls or working in the station or things like that. What we realized is the healthier our firefighters are, the better off they are to handle these physiological and psychological stressors. The next is proficiency at our job. Truly understanding our craft and how it changes as times changes and problems we face change, but being very proficient at it. It goes back to training. Training isn't just a sometimes thing, it's an all the time thing. And the more you train, the more proficient you become at that. Remember when you first learned how to take a hydrant? The goal was you did it over and over and over again. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you got out of bed and you were the hydrant person and you had to take the hydrant, it was memory. You knew what to do. Your body just kind of stepped up and did it. Same thing happens for all types of training. If you become proficient at your craft, it's so much easier for you to apply a solution to the problem you're facing. I remember when I started in the fire service, we were assigned to go to training. The calendar says you're going to training. You have a drill today. Today, firefighters are approaching me as a chief, as a battalion chief on their battalion saying, Chief, let's do this. I want to go out and train more. We have to encourage that. Training is not a pain in the butt type of thing to do. Training it should be that belief that the more you do, the more you understand, the better prepared you are to do your job. It's a lost art form, our job is. There's less fires out there. So we can sit around in the recliners and do nothing and wait for the bell to ring. Or we can get out of there and we get out to the drill ground and start training and do more training. Put ourselves in situations where we've never been before. I remember I was at a class one time on incident command for terrorism. And one of the things they said was, think like a terrorist so you can better understand that. So what it forced us to do is put ourselves in situations we were never in before so we better knew how to command that problem. Ask your firefighters to do the same thing. What haven't you seen before? This is where institutional knowledge comes in. You have that seasoned fire veteran who says, I remember this one time. Utilize that because these people haven't seen it. Be creative in your training. Get out there and get it done because I will guarantee you proficiency will be your best friend when you're placed in a situation where you're not sure exactly what you want to do. We've talked a lot about training, and I understand there's departments out there with a whole bunch of money who are able to have wonderful training facilities. But there's equally a whole bunch of fire departments out there, volunteer departments that don't have a lot of money, are cash strapped. Get creative. There's buildings in your town that if you talk to the owner and says, hey, can we use this? Can we not burn it down, obviously, I don't suggest that. But what I'm suggesting is get into the community. Look at those buildings. Sometimes a walkthrough of a building is just as beneficial as anything else. Don't let lack of funds get in the way of creative training. And you know what else? I challenge you fire officers out there. Listen to the new people. Listen to those young firefighters who are dying to have training. They want that training. They want your knowledge. Let them decide, Chief, I really need to do it this way. The next thing I want to talk about is when we become stressed and we're uncomfortable in the situation, we always fall back into which we are comfortable. When placed in a situation which we aren't comfortable, we aren't used to. We'll always strive to go back to, I'm comfortable doing this, I don't feel good in this environment, I'm going to do this. Fight that urge. Fight that urge. Overcome those stresses and stay where you're uncomfortable, because that's where the problem is. You're more likely to find a better solution in that environment than going back here, I'm comfortable doing this, but it really doesn't apply to this problem, but I know how to do this. Push yourself to that level and understand and identify, I'm uncomfortable with this, but I can't leave. I need to stay here and do what I need to do. Stay focused on the fundamental question of what's my problem. You can't do anything else until you answer that question. So let's talk about situational awareness. If you're the F-15 fighter pilot and you're flying around and you ask yourself the question, hey, what's a mountain goat doing up here? Maybe you're too close to the ground. Maybe you don't understand the situation you're in. This pilot clearly doesn't understand the situation he's in. He only has a limited number of options. In order to make good decisions and to use RPD as is designed, you have to be aware of your situation. And what we're going to talk about here is how just to do that, to how to look at all the clues to make sure you always know where you're at. So I want you to watch this video. I think it plays right into situational awareness. We'll talk about it when it's over.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
So you got to be honest with yourself. I'm not there with you. But how many of you actually saw the gorilla? I'm guessing 50% of you didn't. And that's important to understand, that you could miss something that big because you were focused on nothing more than people wearing white shirts passing a ball. So I challenge you, when you go to fires or you go to an emergency incident, have you missed the gorilla in the room? Are you so focused on what's in front of you, that moth to the flame effect, that you forgot that there's a gorilla right in front of you? It's easy to do. You just did it. So let's talk about how we take that cue and use those tools to understand situational awareness. A good example of individual situational awareness is Aaron Ralston. In April of 2003, he found himself in a slot canyon in Utah, and a boulder had dislodged upon his descent into the canyon and pinned his arm against the canyon wall. For 5 days he sat there trying to figure out how he was going to get out of this situation. The ultimate decision he made was to amputate his arm. And by the way, if you haven't read the book Between a Rock and a Hard Place. It's a great read. Look for it. It's important to understand the issue of individual situational awareness. Aaron was by himself, faced with something he's never dealt before. Is that plausible in the fire service? Could we be placed where we're trapped in a building by ourselves, waiting to be rescued, and have to understand the situation we're in, to truly understand the predicament we're in order to either self-extricate or get us back out to safety? So you may be asking yourself, I'm trapped in a burning building. I pretty much understand the situation. One thing we know about firefighters and that machoism is we refuse to believe we're in the situation we're at. I'm not trapped. I can get myself out. I don't need help. Don't come get me. I'm not going to call a mayday. He understood his situation. He only had one option. He succumbed to the reality. I want to caution firefighters, don't be placed where you're trapped and not recognize you have a problem. We do this all the time in RIT drills and drills where we force firefighters to be trapped in a situation so they can recognize this isn't normal. Remember the couple of questions I asked you earlier on in this presentation? You have to ask yourself those again. What's my problem, and do I have a problem? Never assume you always have the answer to the question, what's my problem? Continually reassess that and ask yourself that question over and over again, just to make sure that you understand the situation you're in. So on December 28, 1978, Flight 173 from Kennedy was inbound to Portland, Oregon. They got to Portland area, they were ready to lower the landing gear and come in on their final descent into the Portland International Airport. When they lowered the landing gear, there was a loud clunk, and the plane yawed to the right. It was not normal procedure for this event. What happened afterwards is really important to talk about. This is what we're talking about, where a whole crew missed what the situation was. The pilot was fixed on, I heard a noise, the landing gear's not working right, I'm gonna need all of those when I land here in a while. So as he's circling the Portland area, the flight engineer and the co-pilot they're looking at the gas gauge, the fuel gauge. Do we have enough fuel to continue looking at this? As they're talking to the maintenance people to try to figure out how to fix the landing gear problem, ultimately what happened was they ran out of fuel. The flight engineer kept on saying, hey, I think we're getting low on fuel. The pilot says, no, we're good. I'm worried about this problem. The flight engineer says, hey, I think we're getting low on fuel. Next thing you know, one of the engines stopped working. The pilot's surprised. Flight 173 crashed into Burnside Street in Portland, and it was quiet because all the engines stopped working. They ran out of gas. There's two important takeaways from that. One is you can't fix a problem you don't know you have. And the other is you don't know what you don't know. It takes the whole crew, the whole engine company, to help that fire officer see their cues, see what's going on. Everybody has a different perspective. A little while ago, half of you saw the gorilla. The other half didn't. What I'm encouraging you to do is say to your fire officer, hey, did you see the gorilla? And that gorilla could be any one of a number of cues to what the problem is. Hey, I think we're running low on fuel. No, we're fine. Let's worry about the gear. And look at everybody on the team as part of looking for that situation, understanding that situation. Because if everybody understands the situation, then isn't everybody going to apply the same logic to the solution? In situational awareness, as a crew, as a team, isn't it fair that everybody has the same information? It's not right for the company officer, the chief, to be the only one with all the knowledge. The more everybody on your team understands the situation, then the more everybody on your team is going to work for the right solution. Don't leave somebody hanging because they don't have a little piece of that informational pie. So what's the fix to understanding situational awareness? Let's look at a couple different things. First of all, picture yourself as the incident commander. And the first one is collective awareness. Empower your people. Have you ever been in a situation, or have you ever worked for somebody who says, I don't care what you think or what you know, I'm in charge? You can't be that IC. You have to allow your people to say, hey, chief, I see something that looks wrong to me. Hey, chief, there's a jug of gasoline with an alarm clock on it. It doesn't look right. Empower your people in an environment for them to feel comfortable coming to you and saying, this doesn't seem right to me. We really need to look at that. Because quite often they're right. And they got a clue that you don't have. So we talked about collectively the team needs to be aware. But individually, that IC needs to be aware. But needs to place themselves in a position to allow for that input. Check your ego at the door. There are people out there that have more knowledge than you do. Or maybe know something that you don't know. Don't be that person who's so hung up on the fact that they're the one in charge, I'm the one that knows everything. I've been to many incidents where I didn't necessarily know the answer to the question. I wasn't the subject matter expert, but I knew where to find them. And I wanted them to give me that information, that knowledge that they have, so I could make a better decision. So individually, just check the ego at the door. You don't need it there anyway. Remember we talked about recognition prime decision making, where you need to make a quick decision right away. The problem is such that you need to react to it right away. What I'm asking you in situational awareness, if you can and when you can, take a moment to identify your problem before applying a solution. The results will always be more positive. Remember, you're looking for a slide, and you'll find that slide a lot more easily if you give yourself the time to look at the problem. So this is one of my favorite ones. We go to a fire. The first arriving fire officer gives a size up. This is what I see, and transmits it on the radio so everybody to hear. That's the mental picture that person is painting for the rest of us responding to the fire. But what do we often not do? And that is resize up. Did the situation change? We're 10 minutes into the problem. Has it changed? Another downfall to situational awareness is it has to change with the changing of the events. So if you're 5 minutes into the fire, you can expect one thing versus what you would get an hour into the fire. So you have to always be that person that reevaluates the situation. Has anything changed? Good example. Is the fire burning long enough that now we haven't been able to get it and it's still burning and it's gotten into the attic? Am I concerned about a roof collapse now? The situation changed. The fire kept on going. But we didn't recognize the fact that maybe we're losing some structural members in the roof. And if we didn't reevaluate that for what it is, we now potentially have a roof collapse. Remember, the incident commander's job is to continually make decisions. And he can't do that unless they continually reevaluate the situation. Don't get locked into one plan. There can be a plan B, a plan C, or a D, or whatever. If this solution to the problem you have isn't working, then stop doing it. If I'm not seeing conversion in the fire, then what's the next step? What's my plan B? Because plan A didn't work. Don't be afraid to move on to plan B. In conclusion, keep these things in mind. We're all human. We all have an amygdala, and we're not going to get rid of it. Learn to live with it. Know your limitations. Don't work outside the box you're comfortable in. And if you have to, find people to help you do that. You can't apply one solution to every problem. Not every problem's the same. So why would we use every solution? Not every house fire is the same. We've been taught that since we began in the fire service. Why apply the same solution over and over again? Look for clues that will help you. There's a gorilla in the room. That might be beneficial. Learn from your failures. Cause and effect. This is the most important one. It's okay to fail. You're going to do that. And hopefully when you train more, and we go back to that training comment we had earlier, that failures are going to become less and less. Fail on the training ground and learn from those, because they'll make you more successful on the fire ground. As I just said, train often. Don't get complacent about training. Don't get comfortable on the recliner. Get uncomfortable on the training ground. And then, most of all, take time to identify your situation. Situational awareness is fundamental for making good decisions. So again, what's your problem?